Hello and welcome to the Outlaws podcast with Kate and Shayla for professionals unlearning the rules of work and life. Ditch the shoulds and build what fits. Today, we're talking to someone who knows the corporate rulebook inside out because she spent decades writing and enforcing it. Jo Bowles built a heavyweight career as a risk and governance specialist, making money and reputations for global financial giants. She was a Macquarie Bank divisional director, a KPMG director, and leading risk management reform at the Commonwealth Bank after the Banking Royal Commission.
Then something shifted. What began as a slow internal unravelling became a completely different way of living and working. Jo has traded certainty for curiosity and charm, and a high-stakes corporate identity for a life built on purpose, presence, and a very different kind of wisdom. This is a conversation about the quiet moments that can change everything, the messy middle we all try to avoid, and what happens when someone at the top of the corporate pyramid decides to write their own rules.
Hi, Jo, and welcome to the Outlaws podcast. We're so happy to have you today.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Shayla. Thanks, Kate.
So tell us a little bit about you and your history and how you came to be Jo.
I started out as a lawyer, but I didn't stay very long in law, mostly because it felt very black and white to me. And so I ended up going into banking. I started out in family law first. That was pretty stressful in South Africa at the time. Yeah, I didn't stay very long. It was interesting. I think I chose law because I really loved structure. I loved frameworks. I liked understanding the rules around how I could help people, and I liked that kind of framework. My parents are not educated at all. Both of them didn't finish school, and so I was the first person to finish school and go to university. And I think I felt a lot of pressure in that space to kind of do something successful,
Professional, big.
Definitely big,
sure.
Have a title. And I think probably underlying that, now that I've done lots of work, it was really about security and safety. That was underlying that, having something that I could fall back on. You know, nobody can ever take your qualifications and your experience away from you. And so that was really drove me in those early years.
It's so interesting. We just hear the same story over and over, don't we, Kate? We ask almost everyone that question. And we've had a few lawyers on, but we've also had some other professionals on, and almost none of them say, you know, I was so passionate about the thing I was doing. That was all I could ever imagine doing. It was just so much of those external factors that are driving people's choices.
Seemed like a good idea.
The pressure from family, the cultural sort of factors. Do you feel as though when you say that your parents weren't educated, do you feel as though there was a pressure from them? Like, did they put the pressure on you, or did you just put that on yourself because you felt as though you had an obligation to do that for some reason?
I think it was both. I think there wasn't really any pressure from them, but we had, you know, back in the 70s, whatever an aptitude test could possibly look like. I was tested, and my dad was like, "Oh, fantastic! You know, you could go a lot further than your mum and I." From that point, yes, there was a little bit of an influence of, okay, you need to go and do something. You need to continue your education past school. But then it was a question of, well, what do I do? I had to make subject choices at 14. And at that point, had to decide what it is that I wanted to do. And the aptitude test came back and said, oh, well, I could do something in business, or I could do journalism, or I could do law. And my dad was like, oh, well, you know, law, that seems pretty interesting. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine.
It's kind of, law always seems to be the professional choice for people who don't like science.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And it's not as flimsy as anything else in the arts, you know?
Right.
So it was, you know, there's definitely a lot of creativity in that space.
Yeah, right.
Don't like blood, don't like numbers, do law.
Yeah, exactly.
So you studied in South Africa, and then what happened?
And then it took a while I struggled to actually find a position where I felt like this is something that I could continue to do every day. And that was really early on. I probably should have listened then. But I decided
But we're young, aren't we? We don't.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't know what belongs to us. It's a difficult thing when you're young to really take notice of that gut instinct, I think.
Yes. It's really interesting that you say that, Kate, about trusting your gut instinct, because that's probably been one of the hardest things for me to rediscover in this part is what is my gut instinct? What is it that I really want versus what has been placed on me by, you know, the culture, the system, my parents, etc.
Yeah, right.
So I went into banking because It was a secure, the money was pretty good. There was some security there. And I liked working with really smart people. I liked the fast pace. I liked problem solving. And so I started to establish my career in banking, initially in the legal department, but then I moved out into more of the banking side. And yeah, that was in Cape Town. And then I moved to England and became much more of a specialist in risk and compliance and kind of
Right.
governance, working in investment banking.
Okay. So what led to the move to England?
And I felt like growing up in Zimbabwe, things were really very narrow-minded, and I never really felt like I fit in there. And so I really wanted to go and see what the world was all about. And yeah, I moved to the UK and really started to specialize in those areas in banking. And yeah, it's hard for me now. I've been watching Industry on HBO. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's all about investment banking and kind of the very toxic environments that they are. And it's so fascinating for me now to kind of look back at that lifestyle and think, how did I last?
Yeah, right. But
What was,
last you did.
tell us about what it was like.
Look, it was really fascinating environments. I think I've said I really enjoyed working with really smart people. And I loved the problem solving. I loved being able to get my teeth into something, understand frameworks, understand what was really going on. And I loved kind of working, as part of a bigger team. I also really loved the title. I loved the validation that brought. There was lots of security. It's not it's not an uncommon story. You get the mortgage, your kids go to private school, and you really struggle to see how life could be different.
Right. So what was the first sense you had that something was not quite right?
I like to describe it as a like a dimmer switch on a light. Like, it wasn't a huge change. I didn't just wake up one day and go,
Right.
I can't do this anymore. It was more about this waking up in that kind of 2 a.m. and thinking, how can I get out of this? How am I going to worrying about, am I going to be found out? Is there, people will realize that I can't hack it. You continue to push yourself through whatever illness, and you get to the end of the year, or you get to a holiday and you think, oh, I wonder if my life could be different. And I think for me, it was very much just looking at things very narrowly. What was the experience that I had? What were the adjacent things that I could possibly do? I wasn't thinking big picture. I don't think I even had the headspace or the energy to be able to think more broadly.
Yeah.
With that.
It's interesting that you say that. I really like that analogy of a dimmer switch, because I think that's often the case, that there's sort of that feeling of, but not quite knowing what the problem is or why it is that you're feeling like that. How many years had you been working in that when you started to sort of feel like that?
So I worked for nearly 9 years in the UK, and then we immigrated to Australia, and I came to Australia with Deutsche Bank, and then I moved and did the stint of the local banks here and ended up Macquarie. So I'd pretty much done 2 decades of work by the time I had reached what I thought was the pinnacle of my success. And it felt so hollow. I think that for many of us, we repeat the same thing. We realized that the ladder we were climbing was against a wall that we didn't really want to climb up.
Yeah. And then, so what was it that made you finally make that change?
It was a series of things. One, I had a really fantastic coach. She was helping me to, work through navigating. I was managing a really large team across 4 different jurisdictions. But I kept talking to her about my life and kept thinking, is this really, is this it? Yes, she was coaching me, and it became less about the career coaching and more about kind of life coaching. And she really encouraged me to think more broadly about what it is, how I wanted to intentionally create the life that I lived. And then I started having a series of, I think just through exhaustion, a series of really, really bad migraines to the point where I would just pass out.
Wow.
And after one particular episode, I just went through a whole series of scans, and thankfully everything was fine. But I kept thinking, is this the last straw? Like, what else needs to happen before I finally make a decision to choose me?
Right. I sometimes think too, in these situations when we're needing sort of really I feel called upon to make a change, is that you kind of get a little tap on the shoulder, which is all too easy to sort of brush away. And then you might get a metaphorical grab of the shoulder. And then even then, it's still depending on how entrenched we are, you can go, oh, yeah, there's something weird happening with my shoulder. Well, eventually, I talk about the universe. That's my kind of way of putting it. The universe will eventually come along and kind of just clock you one until you really can't ignore it anymore. And sometimes I think we all need to get better at listening to the taps until we get to the sledgehammer across the head. But I mean, quite literally for you, because migraines sounds like were your body's way of saying, Joe, enough is enough.
Yes, absolutely. And even at that point, having had all those scares and having the tests, and I was still really just pushing myself, kept thinking, saying the same, I'm not strong enough, I need to work harder, and really trying to push myself. And I felt like if I could just have some rest, if I could just have some time off and I could just get myself right, get my health back in order, then things would be different. And I did try that at first. I took a sabbatical. I was very lucky at the time. I had a manager at Macquarie who said, take some time out, just, go and do some fun things, tick off some of the things on your to-do list and then come back. Thankfully, I did lots of things during that year that really taught me that the life I was living wasn't really how I wanted to show up.
That sounds interesting. Yeah.
A whole year.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I took a year out, which meant that I wasn't technically unemployed. And that gave me that sense of security, I guess, to be able to say, I could say, well, I'm just taking some time out. It was just taking a sabbatical. I was just taking a rest. And that made it almost easier for me to explain cognitively to myself.
So interesting, isn't it? That like the games that we play.
Yes.
Right.
To make it acceptable in inverted commas to others, acceptable in inverted commas to ourselves. That it's such an exhausting game. Rather than just saying, "What do I want to do?" Actually, I don't want to work here anymore, and just leaving. It becomes such a, I guess. We put a whole heap of things in place. So it seems as though it's acceptable because of some rules that we're not even really able to articulate.
Yeah. It's almost like that, that kind of barbecue conversation that you have where people say to you, what is it that you do? And that without having something substantial to refer to, then who the hell am I? And so that gave me a little bit of a framework to say, I'm just taking some time out while I reconsider my option. I was still technically employed. And that made it feel safer and less risky.
Tell us about can you talk about that a little bit, about what was going through your head and what you were kind of scared of, during that time?
That's such a good question. What was I scared of? I think I was scared initially of that if I don't have a title. I was so enmeshed with this identity of who I was in the work environment that if I didn't have that to cling to, then what was I worth? So I was worried about that. I think I was also worried about what would I actually do. So much of our society is focused on doing rather than being. And it sounds so trite, but I don't think you really recognize that until you actually stop doing. It was really painful to suddenly not have all of that, whilst freeing at the same time to suddenly have all of this space. It was also really terrifying to go, oh my God, I have all of the space. Actually, I am making a choice here.
How did you feel your days? Did you feel lost initially? Did you feel happy that you had all this time?
Initially, it was fantastic. I got to do all the things. I had this list of things that I really wanted to do. So I learned how to ocean swim, and I was making jams and pickles and, sourdough before it was a thing during COVID. And I was doing all these things that I just never made time for. And I have always been an insomniac my whole life. And I think it was probably exacerbated by the roles that I had in investment banking, where I was managing multiple jurisdictions, that I was just always, every time I woke up, I would get up and I'd be like, oh, it's 3 a.m. Someone will be up. I'll just start work. And I finally was able to sleep properly. And get those sort of things under. And the freedom of being able to volunteer and not for things, because it didn't feel like it counted. That's when I first started training at Lifeline, because I was curious. I saw a banner that said, are you good at listing? And I was like, yeah, I'm good at listening. I'll give that a try. Let's see what that's all about. And that completely changed my life. And because it was like a low risk option, I was able to play at things and try and experiment when it wasn't really about my career. So I was telling myself, these were just fun things.
Because you can tell yourself too, it's like, oh, I'm still employed in my banking role. I'm just taking a little time out. Let's just dip my toe in. This is very low stakes. So It sounds as though the volunteering at Lifeline was a really pivotal moment in your life. And so can you talk sort of through what changes that led to?
Yeah, it changed lots of things. I think what we were saying about the kind of low stakes option and being able to experiment, that was really good. And it also, I was always really interested in behavior change. And I guess I had been working alongside that for a while, kind of doing risk culture and behavioral change work in banks. And so I was really fascinated about how you actually encourage people to change. And so the psychology had always been something that I had thought, oh, if I did my life again, that's something that I would do.
Right.
I was always reading
Yeah.
those kinds of books and fascinated by it. And thought, well, this is a way that I could get some exposure to it without really, I didn't have to retrain. I could train as a volunteer, and I could be on the phones, and I could be doing something different. It was more about being exposed to people in real crisis. Not saying that I myself wasn't in crisis, but the problems that I was having kind of seemed really insignificant when I was speaking to people who were just going through the most horrific things. And it made me feel incredibly valuable, I guess, or that the fact that I could give value with just being myself. I wasn't trying to solve somebody's problem. I wasn't giving them advice. I wasn't doing anything else. It was really just being me and just being someone on the end of the phone. And I thought, oh, my life really could be different. I could choose something, and I'm not sure where this is going to go, but I could follow this new path.
That's incredible, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
as you say, I think what a lot of people struggle with is, well, what else could I do? That idea of you've got a whole heap of professional skills that can only be applied in one particular way. But it sounds like what you did during that exercise was go, well, I'm good at listening, which, as a you said you only practiced for a lawyer for a short time, but in managing teams and all of those things that you did within your professional world, there's a whole heap of listening that goes into that, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily a skill that we'd go, oh, I'm good at listening and therefore I could do X, So it's so great, I think, that you were able to, well, one, in fact, that they even asked that question. I mean, the first thing is that I'm in tremendous admiration of anyone who works on Lifeline. That's an incredibly valuable service and should be paid for, in my view, that we should have people who are paid to do that role because it's so important for us as a society. But so great that you were then able to see that sign and say, am I a good listener? And just go, yes, I am a good listener. Let me kind of, walk down, I think, as Kate says, follow that breadcrumb, like where might that lead?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was really interesting, I think, because when I saw the banner, it was very much a somatic response in that there wasn't any thinking. It wasn't like I'd looked at, oh, well, this would be a really great thing on paper. It was simply, am I a great listener? And I just felt this sudden kind of urge of being pulled forward. And I was like, yeah, I'm a great listener. I can do that.
I love it when they're the moments, right? And I always think that they are such pivotal moments, but I tend to think they're not random, actually. What's that line when the student is ready, the master appears?
Yes.
I think it's a bit like that because either those opportunities are all around all the time, and it's only when you're ready you'll notice it. But that feeling you're describing, the somatic response, that is such a joyous moment when we can tune into that and know it's like the zing where everything feels in alignment and you just go, that's it.
I think the hard part is then trying to almost rationalize it afterwards.
Right.
Is then trying to say, I feel really drawn to this. I'm really excited by this, but I don't know what this means for the rest of my life. Like, what do I do with it?
Right.
I call it the messy middle, because being in this kind of liminal space of transition where you're going from one career or one life to another.
Right.
You're kind of this process of becoming. You're not quite what you were. And you're not the new thing yet, and you're in this caterpillar
goop.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
You're the
yes.
No disrespect to Gwyneth Paltrow when I say goop. Actually probably some disrespect because I find her very annoying. But you're at the caterpillar in the cocoon. You're transforming into the butterfly, but you are not a caterpillar anymore, and you are not yet a butterfly. You are caterpillar goop, and it's uncomfortable. We've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, and presumably then, Jo, I guess you got to the end of that year of taking time off and doing amazing things that you love doing, and you then had to make a decision. What was that like?
It felt like the beginning of a new year or at the end of a holiday where I had this real sinking feeling. So I'd been offered a role at KPMG. I looked at it on paper and thought, yeah, this is a good opportunity. But I had this real sinking feeling the night before going, oh, I felt like I was putting myself back in a box, all of this freedom and joy that I'd discovered. I was like, well, I can't be me anymore. I have to go back to being the old Joe and kind of almost put that armor back on. So, putting my suits back on and thinking, oh, why am I doing this? Is this really the thing that I should be doing?
I love that. I love that analogy of armor. I actually often say that I felt gagged. There'd probably be some people that say that they've never experienced me as gagged. What's going through my head is not what's coming out of my mouth. I can tell you. So I felt as though law for me for a long time, I was always controlling what it was that I was saying and how I was presenting myself. And the only place I remember that I really felt that I could be the real Shayla was when I go overseas and no one knows who I am and what I do. So I really like that analogy that you say that we sort of put on an armor to be who it is that we think that we should be as a professional. And it's almost like this dual kind of personality thing that we have going on.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely exhausting. And putting on those suits and putting on that, makeup and whatever, and you go back into an environment that really wasn't supportive, wasn't kind. It's an irony that I was in risk management because I was really, managing everything within an inch of its life because I was so terrified of uncertainty, of not knowing. And I've really had to grapple with that, to kind of just trust sometimes that actually this feels right. I don't know why. I don't know what's going to happen with it. But this is interesting. I'm curious about this. I'm just going to follow it.
So did you put the armor back on and go to work or not?
I did. And I've done it a few times since that, actually, because I kept thinking that the burnout or whatever I had experienced, it was just because I was exhausted. I was raising young children and, had this really huge role. Once I'd had a rest, I'm fine now. I can get back on the horse. And so I did that. And yeah, I think once I'd opened that door, though, I was really aware of the dissonance between what I was feeling inside and what I was seeing on the outside. And to the point where I thought I actually cannot do this anymore, and I'm not being a role model for my children if I carry on.
And so then what?
So then I started trying to follow, what do they say? Follow the charm, which sounds such a beautiful thing. And I love the phrase. It's just really hard to implement, especially for someone like me who is really a heady person. Like I like to be able to, read the book, understand the framework, and then implement it. Like doing something that was different to that, really getting in touch with my body and my heart too. What is the impact that I wanted to have on the world? It just felt so foreign. So I started to trust. I started to say, well, you know what, I'll make a little bargain with myself. If I'll just do this and I'll just see. We'll just see what happens. So I kept doing much more at Lifeline. I started working with other mental health charities, becoming a facilitator and a trainer. At the same time, also thinking about, well, I wanted to do some more study because I felt like I didn't have enough behind me. I'd done my coaching qualifications, and so I knew that I wanted to work with individuals. I just wasn't sure how. And coaching it always felt something on the surface, and no disrespect to anybody who's a coach out there. Just for me, the interesting work is really getting underneath the hood and really understanding some of the past trauma, whether you want to call it trauma or not.
So tell us that. So what is it you're doing now? When people say, hey, hi, Joe, so glad to see you at this barbecue. What do you do?
So I've just completed my counseling qualifications. Doing the somatic psychotherapy work is really how I want to work, because I feel like for people, particularly really industrious problem solvers, highly driven achievers, it's difficult to really connect to your body. Like that feels very foreign. And so somatic work is really what is pulling me now.
So Joe, for those who don't know, can you explain what somatic coaching is, or somatic psychotherapy?
Yeah. So somatic comes from the word soma, which is body, and it's about exploring that our body gives us messages long before our brain actually interprets them. And so it's being able to use your body as, I like to think of it as using your body as a bit of a compass. You know, we
Right.
talked about how you have this sort of light bulb moment or you feel really drawn to something. It's really being able to understand some of those impulses and being able to interpret them in a way that is helpful. So yes, it's still moving forward. So it's coaching in a way that you're having a goal that you're working towards. But it's the term for Hakomi, which is the model that I'm working in, is assisted self-study, which is really about the therapist working with someone to help them explore themselves. So understanding what's happening for you and helping guide them inwards.
And
So
tell us, I mean, it's a massive shift actually, Joe, and I think, congratulations for getting there, because the idea of going from a risk specialist in a corporate environment to now being a counselor therapist is massive. And I think a lot of people would be terrified really of that. The distance between those two things would feel overwhelming, I can imagine. So tell us about, I guess, were there moments where you felt overwhelmed, where you thought, how am I ever going to get from where I am to over there? Or it was just, you did it slowly and so you never experienced that? Or
it is incredibly overwhelming. And I didn't really have an ideal of a vision that I was working towards. It wasn't like when I left corporate that I had, oh, I'm going to become a therapist. It happened in sort of lots of iterations where I would gather little bits of information and I'd say, oh, that's really interesting. That's the work that really energizes me. I want to work with people on some level. Could it be coaching? And so I experimented with that for a little bit and was like, oh, that's not quite right. Then I worked in not-for-profit kind of operational roles. Actually, I was COO for Lifeline for a while. And so that gave me some exposure to use some of the old skills, but in a different way that was closer to where I wanted. It was like, no, that's not quite right. So it was a gradual iteration of where I was moving to. I often get on my soapbox because I think that when people talk about change, they talk about this, one moment where you take this leap and suddenly the next minute you've developed a business and sold it for millions of dollars. And that certainly hasn't been my experience. And I don't believe it's real. I really don't believe that change happens like that.
And so you were saying to us just before we started recording that you're going to be finishing your ME certification in COMI certification in June.
That's right.
So what are you imagining that life is going to look like after that for you?
So I'm starting to put that into practice now. So now that I'm a qualified counselor, I'm kind of weaving in the somatic practices when I'm working individually with clients. It's something completely new to start to have a business where you're having to, put yourself out there and get clients. And I often come up against that, the old Joe around what success actually looks like. And I think that's just learned patterns, thinking that our success would have to be hundreds of clients or, people having a wait list or whatever that is. And so my definition of success has completely changed.
What does it look like now?
Yeah, I think it's about being able to put the work that I'm really excited to work with people. And I enjoy getting up every day. And I also have complete flexibility.
That's a great measure, isn't it, though, to go,
Yes.
I'm excited for my day.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that it isn't without, that there's those old fears of uncertainty and like, oh my God, what am I actually doing? How am I going to earn money? And obviously I need a lot less, which reminds me, I love the fact that you've done the backwards budgeting tool. I think that's fantastic because so many people, when they're looking to change, come up against, well, what will the finances look like?
Yeah.
So my needs are so much less, but at the same time, there's still this old track that's playing in my head sometimes that says, oh, well, you're not earning this and you had so much potential. Rubbish.
Yeah. I think it's the same track for so many. It's so true, right? You need actually less than you think that you will need. And if you actually just get that figure, then that gives you the clarity. Of course, it doesn't get rid of all of that idea about, as you say, I had so much potential. Yeah, okay, I only need this much to live, but actually I could earn, 3 times that amount. But you've got to think about what comes with earning 3 times that amount. And we don't often. We just go, yeah, money is the only success metric that we're looking at.
And the costs associated with earning that money
Oh,
too, because there are costs
Yeah.
that we don't tend to think about that. So the true wage or income is actually different anyway, you know?
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's so true. Yeah. So thank you. I'm glad you like the backwards budget. That's nice of you to say.
Yeah, too.
And so tell us about when you were finding it difficult during those times and, coming up against, reminding yourself that maybe success looks different. Were there any particular habits or structures that you put in place so that, when you were coming up against those old rules that you were able to, I guess push them aside a bit easier or try and remind yourself that, because I think, a lot of people that listen to this podcast would be coming up against those same things. And it can feel like quite a lonely journey when you're in that and that you should just go back to what it is that where the money is and, what's familiar to you and what everyone else thinks looks like success. Are there any kind of tips and tricks that you can give to people for when you're feeling like that?
I've had a journaling practice for many years. And I have found now that it's kind of deepened in a way that because I incorporate it with my somatic practice, so I kind of use it as a tool where I actually write about what am I noticing. I'm noticing I feel tense here and try to explore it in a way. It's kind of like a cross between a meditation and a journaling practice. I found that that's really helpful because I'm able to then see the patterns that yesterday I didn't feel that way. And so today I feel this. And so I know then that's only temporary. And so I don't become as attached to some of those old kind of beliefs.
Yeah.
I can also say I've had, especially being on the path that I've been on since Lifeline, I've had a lot of therapy. So I've really been able to get to know myself a lot better and why I make certain choices. And I know that a lot of the earlier choices were driven by wanting validation, wanting security and safety. And actually I can give that to myself now in other ways without having to push myself in environments that don't suit me.
Mm.
So what would you, to someone who is feeling stuck, what would be the main thing you'd suggest?
I think it's about finding things that where your curiosity is leading you. And it sounds like like a trite thing to say, but I think it's often particularly when you're feeling stuck in your career, we tend to look over our past experiences and we kind of analyze, these are the skills and strengths that we have. This is the job that I think that might be interesting. And we sort of almost try and shoehorn into another job without actually thinking, what is it that actually excites me about this stuff? Am I excited about this? And start somewhere small. For me, it was, I'm a good listener, and it's obviously developed into something a lot more than that. But essentially, it was taking something that I didn't really see. I knew I could listen, but it wasn't on my resume, if you like. And it was something that I was really interested in. And once you start scratching that itch, it kind of keeps leading you down a particular path. I like your analogy of breadcrumbs is kind of you go, I like that. And I'm really interested in this. And you start reading different books and you start speaking to people and you get yourself unstuck because you start that kind of intrinsic motivation rather than looking at something that you have to push yourself to go and do, if that makes sense.
But it sounds to me from everything you're saying, it's tuning into your body, isn't it? Because the body knows, because there is nothing like that feeling of full body resonance.
Yes.
And so I guess it's finding ways to honor that feeling, that to when you get those hits, to actually stop and pay attention to them, but to learn what that feeling is, and that it's ultimately it is a breadcrumb, because you can't know where it's going to go. You can only really know one step ahead, don't you?
Yes.
But that's actually enough. You only have to see
One
5
step
meters
ahead.
ahead, but you can do the whole journey that way. Or
Yes.
do you know that expression? I can't think who said it or the exact one, but so follow I think you said charm too.
Yeah.
Follow the charm, follow the curiosity, the breadcrumb, whatever your body is giving you a full body yes to, whether it makes sense to our rational brains or not. That's the clue, right?
I think sometimes we also, because for many of us, we crave the certainty. We want to know where it's going to lead. And so we might look at something like volunteering in a particular way and go, that's interesting, but I don't know that I can I do that every day? Like that was certainly my thinking, looking at Lifeline and going, I couldn't work with people in crisis all day, every day. And so I would shut it down and I'd go, but this is work that I feel drawn to. But because I couldn't see myself doing it all the time, I didn't want to explore it further. And so I really had to challenge myself. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? I could start exploring it in different contexts. And I still am working at Lifeline, and it's 6.5 years now. And I still do that work, but it's a part of the work that I do, because it's still, I have a lot of curiosity about it, but I don't do it all day, every day. But I'm still following the bit that I find interesting in other ways. So I think, having some freedom around it kind of gives you a little bit more space.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us today, Jo. That has been super interesting conversation. Yeah, I just think such an incredible switch, really. It's just such a wide gap, I think, between where you've come from to where you've landed. And I think that will be inspiring for many people. So thank you so much for joining us and for being so honest, I guess, about the experience as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much.
Well, that was a great conversation with Jo, wasn't it?
Fantastic conversation. And, the more we talk to people, so many of the same themes come up all the time: the messy middle, the liminal space, how uncomfortable discomfort is.
And
Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, the point is that everyone is feeling the same and no one is talking about it.
No.
That's what gets me, is that we're all, as she says, got our armor on, pretending that everything's fine here. There's nothing to look at. Can't possibly say what I'm actually thinking or feeling. But everyone is feeling the same.
I also like how Jo talked about the fact that she's living a completely different life now, really, from what she was. But it's not like that solves everything either. There's still difficulties, there's still uncertainties, and that she certainly said she doesn't want people to think she's solved it. I like that too, because I think, it's not like we reach sort of nirvana where there's no concerns ever again.
Yeah.
It's, as humans, I guess we're also work in progress throughout our whole lives. We don't get to a point, well, maybe some people do, but I don't know anyone who has got to a point where the worldly worries melt away.
Yeah, no, it's just that things can be difficult and that's okay as well, that we don't actually have to have beep sorted out all of the time. It's just like,
I certainly don't have my beep sorted out, Shayla.
Yeah. So anyway, look, really great conversation with Jo. Always great to hear stories like that. Such a difference to go from really a global finance and risk specialist to now therapist. Such an inspiring change. So if you like this conversation, Outlaws, let us know. You can find us on all of the usual social media channels or send us an email, contact@outlawspodcast.com. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Shayla. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.